Imagine you woke up in 54 AD and you found a ticket to watch a fight in the Roman Colosseum. The next thing you see is a cage with dwarfs who have no arms, female fighters who have no legs, starved hungry lions, buckets of venomous snakes, and 2 different mystery cages. God knows what's in them. But you take your seat, and you hear the Emperor scream, "Let the fight begin!" Next thing you see, a group of tiny dwarfs enter the battlefield from one side of the Colosseum. Now, the dwarfs did have weapons, tiny swords, little shields, and a crowd full of maniacs cheering for them. But, you ask, where and who is the opponent? That is until you see it, roaring, starved, and as aggressive as your girlfriend, a lion. The match started. As soon as the gate opened, the dwarfs would circle around, probably shouting, hoping the lion got tired or confused. Spoiler alert, it didn't. It usually ended with a single charge and a flying dwarf or 2. The Romans called these comic fights because nothing said comedy like watching small men get turned into bite-sized snacks. Now that the lion survived, you'd think he'd get a promotion or a reward, but in reality he did get a reward. It was a giant elephant who he had to survive in order to find out his next opponent. Once the fight started, the lion would charge, roar, and maybe claw at the elephant's leg. The elephant would respond by stomping the ground so hard the crowd could feel it shake. Some accounts say the elephants even picked lions up with their trunks and threw them, or even picked up spears and poked the lion in the eye, securing an easy win. Next up, the Colosseum was sometimes filled with water to stage fake naval battles, but the Romans didn't stop there. They'd released live crocodiles into the water, and to make it more interesting, they chained prisoners and throw them in the water. These men couldn't move, couldn't swim, and definitely couldn't win. Their only weapon was screaming. The crocodiles, meanwhile, were confused for about 5 seconds, and then they figured it out. The fight didn't last long. The crowd loved the chaos, the splashing, and the occasional human arm floating by. And no, the humans never stood a chance. Next up, Gladiator versus Gladiator. Now, you may think this is a fair matchup. Well, it was, but there was a catch. One gladiator fought blindfolded. The other had his legs tied together so he could barely shuffle. Both were armed, both were furious, and neither had a plan. The fight began with the blind one swinging wildly, while the tied one hopped for his life, occasionally tripping over himself. The crowd loved every second. Most of the time, the tied gladiator would win because he knew where to strike, as he could simply throw swords and spears at the other guy. The winner was whoever accidentally hit the other first, or managed to stay upright the longest. Now that one gladiator survived, he got the usual reward of continuing the fight. Also, to add cherry to the top of the cake, he was untied and had 5 starved wolves thrown against him. They snarled, they snapped, but there's something off. Their eyes are covered. The Romans blinded them beforehand to make the fight fair. Except wolves don't need eyes to kill. They fight by smell, by instinct, by chaos. The wolves scattered, biting at the air, at each other, lunging at every sound. The gladiator moves cautiously, striking whenever he hears claws scrape the sand. The crowd starts howling with laughter, and as usual, Rome found cruelty hilarious. The gladiator would win most of the times due to his vision, but sometimes wolves attacked from behind, making it difficult for the gladiator to focus on one thing, because once the wolves heard him scream, the game was over. Some executions didn't need animals or weapons, just gravity, because the next battle was between convicted prisoners and gravity. Prisoners would be dressed as mythological figures like Icarus or Daedalus. They hurled from tall scaffolds, built inside the arena. The idea was to recreate myths, like to check if Icarus could actually fly, or would it just fall to the ground? Well, the answer was inevitable. The Icarus would fall. The fall wasn't far enough to kill instantly. Often bones broke before silence followed. And if the prisoner is not dead yet, congratulations. You get to witness him being thrown from a higher height than before. And talking about prisoners, there were some more ways to get rid of them. If the emperor felt merciful that day, good news, the prisoner had a 0.5% chance to be a free man. And how does he do that, you may ask? Well, the prisoners were stripped naked, given a single spear to defend themselves, and left to run. Then came the scary part. The wolves, starved, disoriented, and dozens in number. Yeah, the prisoner would have to kill one odd wolf with a spear, but most of the time, the pack would always kill the prisoner with their speed and aggression. But there are some cases recorded where the prisoner survived. For them, the next challenge would arrive, like a lion or a crocodile, or maybe even a gladiator, making their chances of survival to 0.05%. Now, when these executions got boring, the Romans would never fall out of ideas to bring new ones. Next up, we have tied prisoners against boxes full of snakes. Prisoners were chained to posts surrounded by baskets of snakes. Once the lids were removed, chaos followed. Venomous snakes slither around the victim, striking at every moment. If the snake was not venomous, it was enormous. I'm talking pythons, anacondas, all imported from different parts of the world just to entertain the Romans. Archaeological records confirm snakes were indeed used in arena shows and were imported if not available. Next up, we've got a female gladiator against a wild boar. When the Colosseum had less people in attendance, the Romans would bring back the heavy crowds by showcasing female-involved matchups, as the public always had a secret desire with certain women. The boar, powerful and fast, could kill with a single charge. The woman was armed with a spear or javelin, light enough for agility, but hard enough against raw animal force. Sometimes she won, stabbing as the animal lunged. Sometimes she didn't, and the boar would toss the lady in the crowd. The crowd didn't care. The novelty of seeing a woman in combat was enough to sell tickets. Next up, the most watched and entertaining amongst all the matchups. Bestiarius versus animals. The Bestiarius was a gladiator trained for one purpose, to fight animals. These men entered the arena armed with spears or swords and faced everything from leopards to bears. The animals were starved and provoked to ensure aggression, and handlers released them one by one to prolong the show. It wasn't always an execution. Skilled bestiarii could survive for years, earning fame and even freedom. But the job's life expectancy was short. Lions would often break through shields with their jaws, while bears were known to drag men by the throat. The crowd views these fights as contests between civilization and nature, though more often than not, nature made its point clearly. Next, two condemned men, one blind, one crippled, forced to fight. One couldn't see, the other couldn't move fast enough to matter. What followed was slow, desperate, and humiliating. They swung wildly, fell over, and crawled toward each other. And all this while the audience howled with laughter. Roman writers like Juvenal and Seneca described such spectacles as examples of moral decay. The crowd's thirst for cruelty disguised as comedy. There was no winner, only exhaustion and mockery. When one finally stopped moving, the crowd applauded, satisfied that tragedy could still be funny in the Empire's most famous theater. Romans had an endless appetite for the bizarre, and a dwarf fighting an ostrich was considered comic relief. The ostrich, tall and vicious when provoked, could kick hard enough to kill a man. The dwarf, armed with a miniature sword, tried to corner him. Not easy when your opponent runs faster than a chariot. The bird would sprint, flap, and occasionally retaliate. The crowd found the chaos hilarious. There was no winner, only injured dwarfs, with sharp beak marks all over their body. Now it's finally time for you to comment which of these fights you think were the most brutal. Please feel free to be as unfair as possible in the comments. If you want to watch more bizarre videos about ancient Romans, click here.